Welcome, everybody. This is the meeting of the Index Subcommittee of the Incarceration and Prevention Reduction Task Force, and it is 2:30 on April 3rd. Appreciate you all coming. I will start with our land acknowledgement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we're gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. Thank you. All right. Well, our agenda today includes a review of the data request that I sent out following our last meeting, and then two presentations from Julia Garrett, who you met at our last meeting 2 months ago, who is our Village Reach consultant. So welcome, Julia. Thank you for coming back. I'm going to change the order around because I think we will have a more meaningful discussion of the data inventory we started and what the next steps are after we listen to Julia. So if you don't mind, Julia, let's let you lead. And I know you're going to start with a brief introduction of the Stepping Up initiative. Could I ask you a last minute request as well, which is, would you be willing to share for this group your assessment of the other available data sources such as justice counts and measures for justice and all? Because I think that will help inform this group who started out looking fairly heavily at those. So thank you. All right, yeah. Julia, you're on.
Okay. Are you able to hear me? I'm having a bit of a lag.
I think you muted or frozen.
I turned off my video to see if that helps with my connection. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Apologies then that my video's off, but
that's all right.
Yeah, okay, let me share screen and I'll do a brief kind of high-level overview of what Bertie just mentioned in terms of the different resources that I've spent some time looking at. And let me see if I can.
Yes, we can.
Here. So this is, in the process of being finalized, but yeah, I've spent some time looking at justice counts as well as measures for justice. And then beyond that, looking, more into the sequential intercept model, if you all are familiar, and then also the Stepping Up initiative. And the Stepping Up initiative focuses specifically on reducing the number of people with serious mental illness or mental illness in jails. And it has key measures that it looks at to determine success that I think are very well aligned with the Justice Project. And so I do have this resource comparison, which I'm assuming Dean and Lynette, once these comments are addressed, this can be shared out with other folks, that compares kind of the different focuses of these resources, as well as what their strengths and limitations are, and how I see them being most useful for Whatcom. So let me see, I have a table that might, that'll kind of help in the high level summary. So in looking at justice counts, I think, it really is focused on the criminal justice sector and does a great job at providing benchmarking across the justice sector, but it has very minimal behavioral health integration. And that is kind of the same conclusion that I came to for Measures for Justice. So they really focus on court data, and they do incorporate elements of equity. And they have the, really cool feature of the Commons data dashboard. But similarly, they also have limited behavioral health metrics or services outcomes. And so, well, I think that justice counts and Measures for Justice are both strong in the court system as well as the larger criminal justice system. I do think that they miss the behavioral health element that the Justice Project really gets at. And so that's what led me to look more into the sequential intercept model as well as the Stepping Up initiative, because I think that those fill kind of the gaps or that like cross system collaboration that best aligns with the Justice Project. And so the sequential intercept model does system mapping for behavioral health and criminal justice. And it aligns projects across 6 intercepts from community services to law enforcement through kind of courts or initial detention and hearings, courts, jails, reentry. However, it doesn't have built-in metrics or data tools. So it's really more so kind of a structuring for how we're looking at this combination of behavioral health and justice and at the continuum of care. But then the Stepping Up initiative really brings in that behavioral health centered metrics and strategy. So it's kind of what I've recommended is that we use a little bit from all of those 4 different resources. And so that's kind of what this table is capturing here, which, in terms of looking at the individual projects, so project performance across those 15 implementation plan projects would be using the results-based accountability framework and is more of a local evaluation plan, right? Justice Counts and Measures for Justice, as well as the Stepping Up initiative, are not localized to Whatcom and what you all are doing here. And so that is work that I'm doing by talking with kind of key stakeholders one-on-one to create those localized metrics for each project. In terms of looking at like system intercepts, that's taking the sequential intercept model and incorporating local data. And then looking at behavioral health intersection is where kind of the Stepping Up initiative comes in. And then when we're talking about agency benchmarks, so across jails, courts, supervision trends, that's Justice Counts. Process transparency comes in much more in terms of case flow and decision making through Measures for Justice. And then equity tracking, which we'll talk a little bit about today in terms of looking at disparities and discrimination. There are some measures from Measures for Justice that we might be able to use, but I think we'll need to localize some of those as well in terms of what we're actually able to do and what comes. So I know that was a very speedy information dump, and like I said, I'm under the impression that this can get shared more broadly here once I address the final comments. But any kind of immediate reactions before I switch over to the presentation I have for you all?
Mm-hmm. Any comments from anyone at this point? What I found helpful, having just seen this initially in its incomplete form, is I was one of the folks that looked at Measures for Justice as well as Justice Counts. And I think, Julia, you did a nice job of highlighting their strengths and the gaps. And so the assumption that we aren't going to find any off-the-shelf product that we're just going to be able to adopt and use in Whatcom County it sounds like very realistic, meaning that we'll be building our own with pieces from all of it. Anyone have any other thoughts about that? I know you're just seeing it for the first time. Doesn't sound like it. So why don't you go ahead, Julia? And the main presentation Julia's making today, if I could just frame it, is obviously her major task is to develop recommendations for a way to evaluate the actual justice implementation plan as it's moves forward and is implemented. And so that's been her focus. And she's been working with our J-pop group. And I attended the last J-pop and saw her presentation. So this is, I think, a revised model from that. I felt it's important for our index committee to see where she's headed, because we will be the ones made up mostly of those of you who work most closely with the data, who will be intimately involved in how we actually do this. So thank you, Julia, for coming.
Yeah, and thank you for creating time for me today. And yes, it is a revised and updated presentation for those of you like Bertie who may have attended the last J-pop. I think the major revisions or updates I made are some of the questions that I think the index committee can really help with, or at least point me in the right direction based on all of the knowledge that you have. So it's mostly focused on that, but overarching, this is talking about outcome measures. So in the grand scheme of this project, or what Village Reach is supporting with, as Bertie mentioned, is the development of an evaluation and performance measurement plan for the Justice Project implementation plan. And so, when we look at the Justice Project, it employs 5 strategies with key stakeholders implementing 15 activities. And then we worked with the J-pop to refine and come to agreed upon definitions of success that ideally at the operations and process level, the systems level, services level, and facility level, what success would look like. And then under the idea of, okay, if we are successful across all of these things, what are the main outcomes we would expect to see? And those are what we're going to be talking about in more detail today. And I'm going to be sharing some questions with you all that hopefully we'll have time to kind of chat about. And so those key measures are pulled from the Stepping Up initiative, and it's looking at jail bookings, jail length of stay, connections to care, and recidivism. So wanting to reduce the number of jail bookings, shorten the average length of jail stay, increase connections to care once people are released from jail, and then lower recidivism rates. And the piece that, based on the conversation with the J-pop, I think is going to be most different for folks who saw that, is that Stepping Up initiative really focuses on the behavioral health aspect of these indicators, but we got a lot of input from folks that, hey, what about also including race and ethnicity? And so I did some thinking and agreed with what people shared. And this is where we're taking, different pieces of different frameworks and tailoring our approach for Whatcom to make it relevant to the work that you all are doing. And so one key value of the Justice Project is to openly and actively address inequities and discrimination. And, I think the first step is to utilize data to identify what current inequities and discrimination are happening in both the behavioral health and criminal justice system in Whatcom County. And so taking both the behavioral health element that comes very strongly from the Stepping Up initiative, but also looking at disaggregating by race and ethnicity. And so the outcome measures are a little bit broader. They're not just focusing on amongst the behavioral health or people experiencing behavioral health crises. They're more broad, but then the goal is to be able to disaggregate by behavioral health and race and ethnicity, which I'll get into in a little bit of detail. So in order to actually measure these outcomes, we need a clear definition that is agreed upon and tailored for Whatcom County. We then need a formula, so a numerator and denominator, and then we need kind of clear data sources. So what are the data sources for that numerator and denominator, and then a follow-on, which, I don't think we'll get to today, but is identifying, of those data sources, what are the relevant data elements within each source. So today I wanted to kind of bring up some of the questions that I have for each of these different measures that hopefully some folks are able to help answer, and if not on this call, then via email or one-on-one kind of conversations. So what I have so far for key measure 1, which is looking at jail bookings, is it's the definition would be the number of admissions into the jail over the reporting period. And this formula is pretty straightforward in terms of it's the total number of admissions over the reporting period. And then my assumption, and I think we have Caleb on the phone, so he might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, is that this would come from the jail management system, whatever that, if there's a specific name for that data system is. And some of my questions are, I believe this is already being tracked, but wanting to confirm that, kind of by whom, confirm the data system, how often is this being tracked, and is it considered relatively easy, or is it difficult to pull this kind of calculation together? And then, as I mentioned, does this data system have kind of some of these following data elements which would be needed to calculate it in terms of, do we have individual ID, booking ID, admission date? And Bertie, we can either go one by one and have conversations for each measure, or hold the discussion until the end. I don't know, based on the agenda, what would work best.
The agenda really is predominantly your report and the discussion that comes from it. So do you think there's enough overlap that it's worth holding the discussion on where the sources might be till the end, or do you think it makes more sense to do it one by one?
I think that the first two measures, I think, have I'll go through all 4 of them, because I do think a lot of them are going to come from a lot of the data is going to come from the jail management system. So sure, I will go through each one, and then I think we can have a high-level conversation. So in terms of key measure 2, looking at length of stay, that's looking at the average length of stay in number of days for people released from jail. So we would want to look at the total kind of lengths of stay, and then divide that by the total number of release events. And same questions, and really the only addition here would be, also needing release date. So not just admission date, but release date. This one is where we start to get into more some additional elements that we would need to clarify. So looking at connections to care, that's looking at the percentage of people connected to care upon release from jail. And the reason I've bolded connected to care here is that is something that we want to define for Whatcom County. What does it mean to be connected to care? How are we going to determine, a successful connection to care? So some examples are, is it just, okay, there's been a referral to post-release treatment or services? Is it actually scheduling a post-release treatment appointment? Is it actually driving someone to that appointment? So wanting to decide, okay, what is relevant for you all when you say connection to care that you agree on is, yes, this would be a successful connection to care. And then, I wasn't sure and wanted to ask, what data sources would be needed to look at this. Is there something that, the jail is already collecting to indicate that someone's been connected to care? Is that not happening? So we can chat about that here briefly. And then the final one is recidivism. And once again, you'll see that recidivism is bolded because this is another area where we need to have a conversation about what that means for Whatcom County and how you all want to define recidivism. And there are different elements that need to be taken into account. So that's like rearrest, convictions for new crimes, or the return to custody for violating conditions of release. You know, what are we defining as recidivism? And then also, what time period are you wanting to look at? Are you wanting to just look at, you know, what's the percentage of people who have recidivated over a year, 2 years, more than that? And similarly, you know, what data sources would be needed? Is it beyond kind of what the jail is already collecting? I think this is a good stopping point because we'll talk about these 4 key measures before switching into the disaggregation elements, which are bigger questions. So yes, I will kind of open up the floor. Like I said, I think Caleb, he was on the line, maybe he's still on the line. In terms of looking at these 4 outcome measures, what is, based on your knowledge, currently able to be calculated based on what the jail is collecting?
Go ahead, Caleb.
Okay, so currently we use a records management system called Spillman. Well, it's formerly known as Spillman. It's currently Motorola Solutions Flex is the most recent name for it. And we calculate, or I'm sorry, we have data on the number of individuals who were booked into custody since 2014. And we can count the number of people who were booked. We can count the number of bookings that took place, and those are different numbers. We can calculate the length of a person's stay, meaning the time that they were booked into custody and the time when they were released from custody, and then the total amount of time, and then take that period, divide that by an actual average time, for example, 1 year or what have you, and an aggregate of all that information to get a total length of stay or an average length of stay for individuals. There are canned reports from the Spillman database that will essentially give us a breakdown of how many people are in custody from various points in time, you know, less than 24 hours, more than 3 days, and so forth. And we can do that for everybody who's currently in custody, and working on trying to get more data that would be available over a longer period of time for that same metric. Recidivism is, as you know, depends greatly on how we choose to define it. So my level of advocacy in this discussion is that we define it and we declare what we've defined it as, so that when we are reporting information out, everybody is clear, or as clear as can be, on what it is that we're saying.
Right.
Because as Julia was pointing out earlier, if we count rearrest of any sort as a recidivism event, that is going to give you a different number than reincarceration, and that will give you a different number than reincarceration for a new crime. That will give you a different number than reincarceration and conviction. So there are differences in the way you might calculate it. And then, of course, the time period is important as well. Right? So if you consider 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, those are what I would consider to be standard measures for recidivism. But again, we need to clearly define it, in my opinion. In the records management system, we do not track information about the care connections. There will be opportunities in other databases. For example, our behavioral health and reentry staff will likely have information statistical analysis of who's having a connection when releasing from jail and or going to some other form of care.
Mm-hmm.
That's super helpful. So what I'm hearing is that the first two are, in terms of jail bookings and jail length of stay, are ones that, you know, kind of as is right now, you could get that information. And it sounds like it's relatively straightforward in terms of being able to kind of pull that report. Is that a correct understanding?
That is correct.
So the more complicated ones are kind of measure 3 in terms of connections to care and measure 4 for recidivism. And, you know, just knowing that we don't have a ton of time on this call today, one of the things I was hoping we could maybe agree on is, are there kind of key people that either I should talk to, or, you know, we should get kind of a small meeting together for who would be important to come to the decision of what are we as Whatcom County defining as a connection to care, and then separately, you know, what are we defining as recidivism?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we'll come to that decision for both of those on this call today, but that is an action item that I would like to kind of have some next steps on before the end of today's call.
Jeremy, did you have your hand up, Jeremy?
There's charge information there as well. To Chief's point, there's a conversation around recidivism payout for what? I mean, is it for parking tickets? Is it for human trafficking? Is it for?
Right.
There's a lot of people that have a significant amount of contact with the justice system. Not all charges are created equal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Does anybody, I agree, I think probably, as Julia says, the most important discussion today is who from this call, are there those of you who feel like you have a fair amount vested in what those definitions are and would like to be part of the discussion? I think it will, my assumption is it will ultimately come to the IPRTF as a whole. There will be multiple smaller conversations first. So are there folks here that would be very vested in being part of any of those discussions? There's recidivism, there's connections to care, are probably the two major areas. Raise your hand if you want to make sure you're part of it. I'm not seeing any at the moment. I want to mention, and this is probably the best time, that the Behavioral Health Subcommittee and the Legal and Justice Subcommittee have just formed a joint work group on the whole data issue. And so I had been thinking that within that group, there may be people who, because they'll be representing members from the court system as well as members from the behavioral health side, that may have more energy and investment in how these are defined. So I think we'll have no lack of people interested, but I also am very aware that the folks in the index committee are the ones whose feet are really on the ground in the measurement and working in the jail and working in the systems. And I want to make absolutely sure that you have input if you have any. So Dean, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we could also maybe among this group identify who are folks not present, who we believe would be useful contributors to the definitions discussion around both recidivism and connections to care. So, you know, any ideas about
That's a good idea.
who those folks are?
Caleb.
Yeah, my interest, it's not that I'm not interested in being part of the conversation. It's just
No,
that
it's time.
I also am aware of what we track and how we track it.
Right.
Really familiar with the data points.
Mhm.
And so I'm not sure that I am, I'm not disinterested in being involved in the conversation,
Right.
but I will be able to tell or inform any discussion about how we can get to the bottom of a recidivism discussion.
Right.
Because we don't keep track of, or it will be more difficult to keep track of new charges and convictions than it is to simply look at a metric like, did somebody come back into custody? So
Makes sense.
it's not that it's impossible, it just gets increasingly more
Mhm.
complicated the more further you define it. So again, I'm willing to be a part of the discussion, but I don't think I'm the only person involved in that.
Well, I appreciate your input, and I'm the very first meeting of the index committee, I heard loud and clear the limited bandwidth of each of you on this committee, and so I want to be respectful of that, and yet you're also very knowledgeable. So I appreciate that, and I think we can get your input in ways other than asking you to attend further meetings.
Yeah, I mean, Caleb, I'm scheduled to meet with you tomorrow, and I'm wondering if, we could kind of have a part of our meeting to discuss what, would be the easiest way that you're like, yep, we could definitely track recidivism,
Mhm.
defining it as this, and like kind of cascade to this would be the most difficult, because I think, there is a way in the evaluation plan that I could lay out that right now, this is what we are defining recidivism as, and this is, kind of the ideal definition that's not currently able to be calculated, and something that is flagged for, how would we eventually get
Mhm.
there, right? But at least having an initial way to measure recidivism, I think would be helpful. So maybe we can chat about that in a little bit more detail tomorrow, if that works for you, Caleb.
Absolutely.
Good. How about input from anybody else on this regard? Any comments from those of you in other areas of the systems? I'm not trying to put you on the hot spot, because if you don't have comments, that's fine. I just can't see you all on the screen and want to make sure I'm not losing anybody. Jeremy.
Someone who isn't in these conversations, who has a lot of knowledge on the subject in terms of the intersection of the justice system, the nexus of the justice system and mental health services, is going to be mental health court. They know it better, I think, than anybody. And
Okay.
they would have maybe not all the answers, but definitely provide some kind of rubric in which direction to go.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
And that's the manager for them is Robin Willens, is their full name.
Great.
I am gonna move us along, Brady, just because I think one of
Please do.
I think there will be some overlap here with the next piece. So looking beyond the measures kind of as a whole, the ideal would be, and this is not, give me 1 second. Okay, it's not showing my updated slide there, but or the ideal would be to disaggregate these outcomes, to be able to actually look at areas of discrimination and inequities in the system. And as we talked about earlier, the two kind of key pieces that have been brought up with the JPOP and others so far is looking at, is there a disproportionate impact on folks who have a mental illness or serious mental illness or substance addiction, and is there disproportionate kind of impact on different races and ethnicities? And so looking into what would it take to actually be able to disaggregate all 4 of those measures by these elements. I think the one that's going to be most challenging is behavioral health. And that the challenge is 2-pronged. One, similar to kind of connections to care and recidivism, actually defining and agreeing upon what Whatcom County is seeing as a mental illness, a serious mental illness, substance addiction. Are there current definitions that are used to determine eligibility for publicly funded services in Whatcom County that we could kind of use as a starting point? And then are these definitions the same across the continuum of care? So is it the same definition that might be used in behavioral health services that's used in the jail to identify if someone has a mental illness or an SMI or substance addiction? And then, once we have that definition, is there a way for the jail to identify that? What is the current process for identifying whether a person may have a mental illness or a substance addiction? Is there a tool being used that's objective and validated? And is this data being tracked electronically? So this is, I think, the harder of the two. For race and ethnicity, there is wanting to kind of agree on how it is being defined across Whatcom County data systems. So typically, jails and other criminal justice and behavioral health agencies collect race and ethnicity data according to the U.S. Census categories. But I am curious if that is the case in Whatcom, and also what systems in this ecosystem are currently gathering race and ethnicity data, and how is it being gathered? Ideally, it should be being gathered via self-identification. And so curious if that's the current process at the jail and in other data systems. So Caleb, I think some of this comes back to you in terms of being able to share out what's currently happening at the jail for both race, ethnicity, as well as mental illness, SMI, and substance addiction.
Yes, Caleb.
So in terms of mental illness, serious mental illness, substance use disorder, the jail provides a variety and fairly large scale solutions to some of those challenges people may be facing while they're in custody. And we also have electronic health records. I'm working with my nursing supervisor via text right now to try and figure out if there's a metric that they use. I can say for sure that corrections deputies are not making a determination via a tool or screening tool to make that determination. Usually what happens is that is done by a mental health professional, and that is data that is gathered for that particular purpose. And so it's not something that we have access to. And generally we're told what we need to be told. For example, if somebody needs a particular level of housing or a particular level of conditions while they're in the facility, then we're told this is what you need to do with this individual by our mental health professional or by medical staff. We follow those very specifically. Now, our electronic records may be able to give us some statistical information about those individuals, but I'm not sure. So I will endeavor to find out that answer. With regard to race and ethnicity, we have uniform correction staff who are gathering demographic information about people who are booked. We do try to fill in some blanks in our demographic screen, including what people want to report out as in terms of their race or ethnicity. And so we do capture that as reported at intake. Not everybody is cooperative at intake, so I can't guarantee that there's a one-to-one correlation between, what everybody who's in custody and having some data for each person. And then,
Mhm.
and then on top of that, some people don't want to report things. So
Right.
we're not writing things down every time. And so we will have, if you look at some of the reports that we produce, unknown
Yeah.
as a race or ethnicity.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
I don't remember the exact year, but at some point in recent history, 2017, 2016, somewhere in that range, we had been gathering data in a particular way, and a rule changed at the state level with the manner in which we were gathering the information, and it sort of reset all of the ethnicities that we had gathered into the facility.
Mhm.
And so some of the information was lost, and we have been working to try and recapture that information, but it's not a guarantee that we're going to have all of that.
Right.
Okay.
I think that answers those two questions. Was there anything I missed?
Just a clarification. So it sounds like at booking, you are asking people to report out on their race, ethnicity, and obviously, there's many things that go into whether or not it's a one-to-one accurate match, which is understandable. But it sounds like in terms of kind of a mental health screening or assessment, that is not done at booking.
Well, it is not done immediately at booking unless there is some reason for it. The clinicians use a standard behavioral assessment form and criteria to identify people with serious mental illness. But again, that's not something that they report to us.
Mhm.
So there's no, in the kind of records management system for the jail, that would include race, ethnicity data, but it wouldn't include any kind of flag for mental illness, serious mental illness, or substance use disorder.
We have flags that we can use to identify people who have reported suicidality and other things like that. But it is not as reliable as an objective instrument that is used to screen people for serious mental illness.
Okay.
I have a question. If it were de-identified in some fashion, is it in the medical record that you currently use? So, I mean, I haven't seen the jail medical record. Most medical records have a quote problem list, and you could query by certain diagnoses on the problem list, but I don't know if you even know that, or if there is, if it would be possible to de-identify and use that as a source.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I believe that you are correct that the medical information has a problem list, but I don't know how or if it can be
Right.
de-identified.
Okay, and that it's going to change in the long run, right, to Epic?
That is the current trajectory, although that may have changed in the last couple of weeks, and I was not.
Yeah, right. There's a lot changing in the last couple of weeks. Okay, fine. Well, thank you. Jeremy, you have your hand up as well. I think you're still muted.
There's an intersection to both of your points. There's an intersection in federal rules and regulations around the interaction between the justice system and healthcare information. To Chief Erickson's point, they're told exactly what it is they need to know. The classic example being an officer is looking for somebody, they walk into a hospital and say, do you have this person? And the response from the hospital staff is, well, do you have an open warrant? Is this person like, there's all sorts of, we just can't come in here and ask if we have somebody. Similar rules and regulations exist here, and it's complicated because I'm not intimately familiar with the jail rules. Right. Underneath the existing HIPAA CFR 164, there's permitted use and disclosure, permitted, not limited to treatment operations, quality assessment, evaluation, and credentialing, review, auditing, insurance, administrative tasks, and there are exceptions and considerations around substance abuse, behavioral health, psychotherapy notes, and so on. I don't know where Village Reach is at, but there is this process that's really, really visible and really, really public. There would be a tremendous amount of efficiency and credibility lended to the process if there is staff assigned to chase down and to confirm the specific details with the existing federal regulations around handling this information. The
Mm,
technology exists. We could export things from various systems and aggregate them and pull things and de-identify them. There is a question of, upon examination from any kind of attorney worth their salt, was that done in accordance with the regulations,
right,
regardless of our intention? So I'm
right.
just putting that on the table there.
Yep. Yeah, and that's, you know, that's kind of the next layer of this, right? Is all of the data sharing agreements and things that would have to be done. And so like part of the evaluation and performance measurement plan is, you know, we can, as Village Reach, suggest and recommend that this is what we think you should measure. And these are the data systems that exist and would allow you to measure to this extent. But if you wanted to be able to actually measure or disaggregate along behavioral health, like X, Y, and Z would need to be done. And, you know, there's that it gets complicated. So you're incredibly right. And is something that needs to be done right. Because it doesn't, like, the intent doesn't matter, right? So that is a good flag. And it's something that's on my radar. And it's very complex. So yeah. Okay, well, these are kind of the last slides that I had. So I think for me, if I'm to, you know, think about immediate next steps, Caleb and I are meeting tomorrow already, so we'll chat a little bit more about recidivism, and I can share back with this group. And Jeremy provided a contact for mental health court that that I can get connected with to chat more about connection to care. In regards to the defining, you know, what mental illness, serious mental illness, substance use disorder is, are any of you on the call aware of, you know, does Whatcom County already have definitions it's using for that? Or is there someone I can connect with that might know? Dean, I see your hand.
I think within the Health and Community Services Department and the RSD division, there are folks who can look at, you know, what are some of the sort of nationally accepted definitions of SMI or SUD, and then we can look at those and determine whether, you know, use of those, you know, whether there are data that could support using those definitions that are available. And when you and I talk after this call, just do our check-in. Let's visit about, you know, who are some of the staff maybe to loop you in with.
Great.
Caleb.
It looks like we use the DSM-5 guidelines to determine where people fall within those definitions.
Okay, it's helpful. My question is, when you review the Stepping Up initiative, I noticed that they refer to it as SMI, serious mental illness. Did they talk at all about how they defined it?
Yeah, so there's some information that they have kind of on the definition that other counties have used. So we could look at that because there's many counties that have gone kind of down this road of collecting this information. So I can also pull that, but you know, I think what they do really emphasize is, right, there is some stuff that's at a federal or national level, but then there's a lot of state regulations and things and differences and definitions. So it might be different for Washington than it is for Pennsylvania than it is for wherever. So I don't think that they give a 100% here is the definition everyone should use. They kind of caveat that
right.
You should look into your state or county. So yeah, so we can.
It might give us some ideas about how other folks approached it. That's the only thing I was thinking.
I can take a peek at some of the resources. Yeah.
Julia, do you have other questions of this group at this point?
Not right now.
Okay.
So yeah, I think, but I do think, yeah, like I said, I'll chat with Caleb and and as I'm getting more into the the interactions of data systems, Jeremy might be a good person to follow up with, if you're okay with me reaching out to you, Jeremy.
Mhm.
I will defer to my lead, Bennett, in terms of what our allocation is for this project.
Right. Right. Well, thank you all for this. And we only have just a very few minutes left. I just wanted to comment on the requested data review because we were starting out somewhat against your advice, Julia, to start to assess what data is available without your more specific focus of what data you specifically think is needed. And I appreciate all those of you who responded. I think it's useful to have those reports available as we go forward. And I think we're going to probably find ourselves prioritizing a lot in terms of what we decide to measure and do. And that's where Julia's leadership around the number one task of visibly and transparently measuring the implementation plan is probably going to help focus that. So thank you very much. I won't send out further requests at this point. I think Julia's on it. Any other comments from this group? I will pause to see if any outsiders have comments, but first I just want to say our next meeting will be in June, which will be Julia's final month of this current contract. So Julia, hopefully you can be present yet again and give us further information at that point.
Yeah, definitely. Can you just share the day so I can jot it down? What day in June, do you know?
Right, exactly. So, Jill, do we have members of the public listening in that would like to comment?
We do. First of all, Julia, that date is June 5th at
Thank
2:30
you.
p.m. And also Bertie, Dean White has his hand raised.
Oh, apologize, Dean. Yes.
That's all right. I just wondered if, the requested data review are the responses to your request being sort of archived or placed in some common location that we can
At the moment, they're archived probably on Jill's and my computer. Jeremy gave the most in-depth by giving me a link to a team page throughout the health department. And I imagine that you have access to that data, but that was the most. And then Caleb sent a report of that, which is available in the jail. And Maya from the public defender's office is very interested, and she's out of town this week, so I don't mean to be speaking too much for her, but she was concerned about what data she had permission to share and not, and I think perhaps misunderstood the question a little bit, that we were interested more in just generic data fields. But at any rate, she wasn't available to further that discussion, so.
Okay, and a while back, Perry, if you're still attending on the call, you had created a kind of a list of all of the various applications or data systems, and I went looking to try and find that list. I haven't been able to find it. I'm wondering if we could get,
And I think that was the summary list.
yeah, if you could just maybe share that around for the
Okay.
committee as well. And has there been any more done with that in terms of fleshing out some of the details of each of those systems and what's available?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, there's some of the systems that are being upgraded and things like that.
Okay,
But I think the core systems are still valid.
okay. Well, if you could just send that out again, and then Bertie, I'm thinking when we have our data work group meeting, maybe we can take a look at that list and think about what further delving into that list we need to do.
I think that would be very helpful. Perry, may I ask a question? Is that the original list that the index committee did several years ago, or is it an updated one?
It's my IT list of systems that I'm
Got it. Okay, I don't think I have that one yet. But as long as you send it to Dean, that's fine. Good. Thank you. Okay, how about public comment then?
Thank you. We do have attendees. If any of you would like to speak to the committee, please virtually raise your hand now. No hands are raised, and I don't see
Okay.
anyone in our conference room. Bertie, if you could stay after the meeting for just a moment to chat, that would be great.
Sure.
Did you want to adjourn the meeting, Bertie?
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought you was just scanning the conference room. Yes, so we will consider the meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much for coming. Appreciate your participation. Have